One of the first people to report the Dero and Dero in these cavernous regions in which they dwell was Richard Shaver. This is the story of how, seemingly on accident, he was in contact with the Dero or the Dero, and it eventually led to a trip to a subterranean realm where the Dero and the Dero were at war. And he had contact with these beings and was given information which he reported to Ray Palmer with a 10,000 word letter called A Warning to Future Man. Sometime around 1932, Richard Shaver was working as a welder in a Detroit auto plant. The welding gun on his job site, by some freak of the coil field attunements, was allowing him to pick up on his co-workers' thoughts. Most people would say that that's schizophrenia, but let's listen to a little bit of his story. "Hey, Joe Raditz, bring that dolly over here." I glanced up casually from my spot welding, then blinked in puzzlement as my eyes took in the immediate area around me. The voice in my ear had come out of nowhere. No fellow worker in this Detroit auto plant was near enough for his voice to be heard by me. "What in the devil?" I muttered, and then shrugged in mystification and turned back to my work. The moment I snapped the switch on my spot welder, the voice came back again. "No damn well this rivet won't fit. Don't tell me I don't know a 9/32 hole when I see one." The voice died away, and he had listened intently for a little bit, and it didn't come back. Well, Shaver was wondering about this Raditz guy, because he had heard that, and he figured that he was hearing people's voices from around him. And he ended up going to the clocky, the guy who keeps the time, and he said, "Do me a favor, clocky," he asked, and he said, "Sure thing." But anyway, he asked him if there's a Raditz that works there, and the clocky ended up saying, I'll look as long as I don't have to get up off my butt here, and so he spins around and he runs his finger down the old time cards that you used to have to put in the slots when people clocked in, and he did find a Raditz, and the Raditz guy worked on the other end of the building, and he was a riveter. So he had heard this guy talking about these rivets, and he also heard the guy's name being in conversation with one of his fellow workers that was close to him. So he realized later that these field attunements was picking up people that had their equipment wired to the same home run or the same wiring system that his machine was hooked to. So all the people on that one line, that their instruments or their tools were hooked to that one electric line that he was hooked to, he was able to pick up their voices, and he was able to hear them according to him because of this freak in the coils of his welding gun. He did also ask that he could get this welding gun of his fixed, and he was going to submit it to have it worked on because he told the clocky that there was something wrong with it. Well, before he could get the gun fixed, and he was back at work, and he noticed that he started picking up on a conversation that was not his co-workers, and it was a torture session that was coming from a cavernous realm from these Dero creatures. Well, this started to scare him, and he didn't know if maybe he was going crazy, and he didn't like it, and he didn't want to continue to do it, so he ended up quitting this job and going on what they called in the 30s, going on the bum. So he traveled around the country doing odd jobs, doing his art, doing different things like that, and jumping on trains and drinking some wine, and he ended up landing himself in jail. Well, it's while he was in jail that these Dero beings, according to Shaver, started targeting him, and the fellow prisoners in the immediate area were being targeted also. And then the story starts to get good, and he starts to have some contact here where a woman called Nydia comes to his cell, and we'll just have to go look at this story, but he ends up making a trip to the cavernous region and supposedly spent 8 years there. So let's look at this story. For those who are new to this subject matter, I want to say this before we look at Richard Shaver's account of what happened while he was in jail. I have had an extra-dimensional being come into my room when I lived in Texas, and he stuck a device to the side of my head. He twisted my arm behind my back, and he was laughing at me, and then a doorway opened up, and a shadow being came into that doorway, and then something happened that scared the Dero and the shadow being off, and it was a roar of some kind that came from the right side of my room, and I didn't see this entity, but it scared both of them, and they fled. So when I look at Richard Shaver's case, I believe that he did have some kind of an encounter. Whether it was all an illusion or some kind of huge deception, it's hard saying. It's hard to sort these things out totally. But I do believe he had an encounter with an extra-dimensional being, and it had technology at its disposal, and it used it on him. So I don't think he was totally crazy. He may have had some kind of mental issues going on, but it may have been caused by these Deros and Teros that he says that he encountered. So having said that, as my disclaimer, I know that Richard Shaver's wife said that he got saved in the latter part of his life, and when he got saved and accepted Jesus as his Savior, that the torment stopped and he found peace. So now, let's go look at what happened to Richard Shaver when he was in jail. The pains got worse. Finally I knew what it was, but I didn't believe it. It was people living in caves under and around the prison, and the people's kids like to torment us prisoners. Not just pester, but real genuine torture done with some kind of x-ray. At last I got mentally used to knowing this, but I finally got wise to a couple of other sufferers from the unseen rays, and we would get off in a corner and discuss this thing. So I didn't feel so alone about it all. We all knew that something was very wrong about ordinary people's ideas of what the world was like. I realized that modern science must have developed a lot of secret things that rich people had got a hold of and were keeping from common people. But then Richard Shaver went on to say that he thought it was the communists at first, and then he thought just these rich people and secret government people had these secret ray technologies, but then he realized that he was wrong. So after this, about 1 o'clock in the morning, something different happened. Leading up to this 1 o'clock in the morning experience, he noticed that the rays that were being targeted toward him had changed from tormenting to a pleasure type ray. So in some of these cases that we hear about with abduction and what have you, that people talk about how they felt. I felt this love when the thing touched me, the gray or whatever. But he noticed that this change happened, and there was a mental telepathy kind of transfer where he knew that this woman named Nydia had intervened for him somehow through this separate group of Deros, which are called Teros. So there was a Dero, the bad guys, Teros, the good guys, and this Nydia was part of this group. So it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. He says, my door on my cell opened. I sat up astonished. What did the screws want with me this time of night? But the turnkey stood just outside the door, a dazed, confused expression on his face. I thought he was walking in his sleep till I saw him standing behind the transparent image, the half-existent projection. I had learned to love my girl of the secret people. So this girl who had put a projection into his cell of herself. Now she is standing in an underground cavern at this ray machine that projects holograms. So when people talk about the blue beam technology and things like that, this here is a way advanced kind of version of the blue beam technology that can make a projection from an underground cavern into his cell, and she projects her image into his cell. Now Nydia, from this machine that she is operating, is able to hypnotize the guard, make the guard open the cell door, and then the guard goes and opens the back door, and then Nydia takes her hologram and leads Richard Shaver out of the prison, behind the prison, out through the woods into a mountain that's behind the prison, and she leads him in through a secret entrance to a meeting with herself inside this mountain in a cavernous realm. And that is Shaver's first entrance into the cavern region, led by a hologram from jail. After Richard was looking around, and he noticed some of these machines that she was using, and the people of the caverns called them ancient mech. It was a technology that was left by the Atlanteans or Titans. They called them both. So when they left the planet due to radiation from the sun, then these abandoned people called Dero and Dero basically used this technology to help keep them alive. But anyway, as Richard was looking around, he asked where her people were, and she said that they were leaving them to themselves for their meeting, and he should meet them soon. And then, in many ways, she said that they are different from surface folk, and you must not let these differences disturb you. They are prepared to welcome you heartily, and because I love you, they love me. But it is not our custom to admit surface people to our hidden ways, for they are so apt to fear us and to hate us and to be a danger to us. And she asked him to meet them and not act repulsed or shocked or anything at their appearance. Nydia also said that they had tried to appeal to surface dwellers before to ask for help to fight against these Dero creatures that were threatening to wipe them out. But whenever they would appear to surface dwellers and to different leaders or what have you, they would always be scared of them and would assume they were devils or ghosts and things like that. And after that, she shows him and tells him about these other Dero creatures that are living devils, she called them. And she had a machine which they could look into, and she could point it out into the distance, and it would pick these devils up. And Richard Shaver was very shocked when he saw these other Deros, because they were doing torture type things and involved in some very, very evil type things. And then she showed him a T-log machine, which they could point up through the vast rock layers, and they could read people's minds from miles away. So they didn't really read books or anything like that. They did have some books there, he said, and different things, from even some modern type books, because they did make trips to the surface. But they could read people's mind, and they had what they called thought records, even from the Atlanteans. So she puts him on a machine that where he could learn through these thought records, and it would be like being the other person, the Atlantean. It would be like living that person's life for a little while, and then you get all these records through the thought records that they had recorded into these machines. And then he was to learn these different machines to be able to use as a weapon against these Deros that were on the verge of attacking the group of 50 that Nydia lived with. And these Deros were constantly in pursuit of them and trying to kill them because they were against making people suffer and doing the evil things towards the surface dwelling people. And therefore he studied from these machines, went through all these thought records, and learned how to use these T-log devices and all the different weapon type stuff. And then she showed him other machines that were used for pleasure or recreation, and they were also Titan technology that were used even by the kids or the adults, and they were for more pleasure type things and different recreational activities and what have you. So those were some of the machines that she showed him. And then Richard was about to meet the group of 50 that she was with, and then they spent a lot of time scanning through the rock layers to make sure that these Deros weren't getting close to them. Well, according to Richard Shaver, he spent about 8 years with the Dero in these cavernous regions, and they spent a majority of their time scanning through the rock layers and looking for these Deros that might be raiding the Deros, and Richard himself with them. But over time, the Deros outranged them with the equipment and the ancient mech that they had, and eventually the Deros raided the group that Shaver was with, and they supposedly or allegedly killed off everyone. And in one account he said that he was the only one left alive, and then there's another account that he told while in Delaware that he was not the only one, but there was only a couple left. And so he ended up making his way back out of the cavernous realm, by which way he came, and he wasn't supposed to let anyone know about this until he was given permission by the Dero to warn the surface dwelling people of the world about the Dero. And that is the reason why he wrote a warning to future man and gave it to Ray Palmer, and he ended up changing that into a story which hurt the credibility of the information, because Ray Palmer changed it into I Remember Lemura and made it into a sci-fi type thing, and it was supposedly a true story of this Dero and Dero beings and Atlantis and Titans and stuff like that. So it ended up hurting the case, and most people kind of ran from it, laughed at it, and things like that. But as I said before, I've seen one of these beings before myself, and I know that it had some little device that it used on my head. I didn't see any cavernous realms or anything like that, but it did have a shadow being that ended up coming with it, and he had a device of some type that he used. So Richard Shaver, he encountered something. I don't think he was crazy. Maybe these beings about drove him crazy. But in the end, the Dero raided them and killed off everyone, and then later he wrote a warning to future man. One interesting thought, when I was on the radio show the other day, The Sharpening, or a few months back. But he was talking about the Indian god called Ganesh. And this is an elephant-looking being. And I was wondering if the people in India or in the Hindu religion had encountered these Dero type beings. And then also there was something in the book of Jasher at the Tower of Babel. There was 3 different groups of people who were up on this tower. And one of the particular groups got killed, and another group was thwarted in what they were trying to do. But there was one particular of these 3 groups that was struck by God, and they became as apes and elephants. And I just thought that was a really odd thing to say, because it made me think of Bigfoot, and it made me think of Deros, or this Ganesh. And this particular Ganesh thing from India is the god of obstacles. And it seems to me that with Shaver, or even with my encounters with them once there, that I've had times where I seem to have these obstacles always coming up. And maybe this is a demonic activity or a fallen angel type being that tries to throw obstacles out in front of you. Just a thought. But anyway, it made me wonder about Bigfoot, and it made me wonder about the Deros. Now, also I was thinking about Phil Schneider, who was involved in this underground base building. He was a geologist for the government, and he was involved in tunneling and doing these things like at the S4 facility and Groom Lake and all that type of thing. But he got in a battle in an underground base that they were digging holes for. He got lowered down in a basket and got into a battle and had his fingers basically zapped off, and opened him up like a fish, he said. And he tells his story about encountering a gray type alien. But Richard Shaver said that these Deros basically live in these underground realms and use this ancient mech and all kinds of different devices that can teleport things through miles of rock. They can actually take matter and teleport it through these miles of rock. And when they showed up in my room that time, somehow they teleported in and teleported out. So it made me wonder maybe if there was something going on there, because he did have a device in his hand. Another thing that Richard Shaver said was after the Atlanteans left, they weren't going to ever come back to this realm. But the Dero, since they and the Taro basically have confiscated all this equipment, they don't have any problem with human beings coming down and trying to take some of this equipment and these ancient mech from them so much. But I was wondering if our government is getting to the point maybe where they would do such a thing. But he said that the other, like grays and other type alien beings that are out there, whether they're extra dimensional, fallen angels, or whatever they might be, he said that they raid the cavernous regions with impunity sometimes. But he said it's not that big a deal, because the cavernous regions are so vast that they could raid and take some of the ancient mech for 10,000 years, and they still wouldn't get but about 10% of what is down there. So is that why our government spends so much money with Bechtel and some of those other organizations that tunnel and they do the mining and dig these vast expanses, miles and miles wide, and also tunneling through and underneath all kinds of places throughout the United States, under the oceans and many, many different places? Are they running into this type thing? Is this what Phil was talking about, Mr. Snyder, when he said that they didn't tell him about this and they knew that it was down there. Just some thoughts. I don't know everything when it comes to this kind of material, other than I believe in Jesus as my Lord, and they don't mess with me too much. I think they try to jack with me a few times in my life for sure, and maybe they still try some. And I have had a few encounters, but nothing like the physical where they grabbed me and did that kind of stuff. And you can see my encounters on my channel. But anyway, you all, I'd like to hear your stories. Send them in to me at brentonsong@gmail.com. Subscribe, and I ask that you share these videos. You can go to my channel, click the Facebook button, and go to my Facebook page, Mysteries to Search, and you can contribute to help me make these videos and help me with the ministry that I have that helps people get free from these attacks and things like that. And I get several cases per month where people call and they're in serious trouble, but after we pray and I tell them a little bit about the Lord, then they always end up writing me back. Almost always, I say. Sometimes I don't hear from people, but it's very rare. But they almost always write me back and tell me how they have no more activity. God bless you. Subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.